for talking about INN, who is our next panelist as well. And INN has their own model of journalism, of nonprofit news, and it is in many ways doing great things around for the industry. Let me see. Let me make sure that I'm still in the right room here. I believe I am. All right. And so, yeah, so coming up next, we have the Institute for Non-Profit News. They're putting on a panel here today to talk about really to introduce people to nonprofit news. A lot of folks have read nonprofit news and didn't know that they were reading nonprofit news, but it's a really great model for journalism. It's something that's kind of emerged recently, I think, as a response to a lot of the things that Jeff was just talking about. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our lifetime member, Sewell Chan, was just named as the editor of the Texas Tribune, had his first day recently. And let's see here. Have we got our panelists promoted yet? All right. And anyway, so yeah, so given the state of media today that Jeff described, and you know, there've been a lot of destructive changes to advertising models. We've seen how nonprofit news kind of paves one way forward for the Fourth Estate to continue its mission to deliver accurate, timely, and excellent news to media consumers. And so what do we have here? It looks like we've got Xanthe right now. I'm going to ask you to unmute and you can take it away, Xanthe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here with your audience and thrilled to be a part of the INN panel. Sarah, are you here? I know you plan to open up the panel.
I see. Ben, you can, it's because Sarah signed into INN Events is the name. That's, we didn't know that would be the name. So yeah, Ben, you can promote her to, there we go.
Here she is. And Sherman is here as well. Sherman Gillums Jr., who will be with us too.
Thanks, Xanthe. Sorry, my Zoom sometimes turns against me and signs me in a different way.
And now we just have Sherman who's entered as well. Is that everyone? Okay, great.
And then Kelly will be joining us shortly. I think she has something she needs to take care of, and then she'll be in here with us.
All right, we'll be on the lookout for her. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you. And hello to all the INN members who I know are out there. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. Today, we're talking about nonprofit news, why it matters for communities and our country, and about jobs with competitive salaries that you might want to check out. I'm Sarah Shariari. I'm the Director of Leadership and Talent Development at the Institute for Nonprofit News. And INN supports more than 350 independent, nonprofit, and nonpartisan news organizations that are dedicated to public service. And we're really proud to partner with military veterans in journalism. Before I turn the program over to our amazing panelists, I want to share a little bit about growth in nonprofit news and what sets it apart. You might be familiar with some of INN's biggest groundbreaking members like the Texas Tribune, ProPublica, Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, but there are robust and innovative members around the country. There is almost definitely one close to where you are living now. And by innovative, I mean that member outlets do things like answer readers' questions by text because they found that's how it's most accessible to people. And they deeply engage communities in their reporting, including helping communities come in and give them input on the actual reporting that they do. Also, this field has just grown exponentially over the last decade. So it's great to be part of something where there is growth and innovation going on. INN members are really working to convey the truth, to build community ties, and to inform people in their communities so they can make decisions about their own lives and about their civic life. So if that's interesting to you, I encourage you to visit inn.org, and I'll drop all these links in the chat to learn more and check out our members' many open job listings, which we put up weekly. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Xanthe Scharff. Xanthe is the co-founder and CEO of the Fuller Project and our great panelists. So you can hear from these nonprofit leaders about their work and about why they choose nonprofit news as a space to invest their valuable time and energy. Dropping links in the chat, and over to you, Xanthe.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thrilled to be here with Sherman Gillums Jr. and Kelly Kennedy. We're going to have a great conversation. I have gotten to know both Sherman and Kelly over the years through work and collaboration. And so looking forward to having a lively conversation today that helps to inform you all about our individual newsrooms. And then also let's open it up so that we hear from you. We're going to move fast. We've got a relatively short panel. And so what I'm going to ask is just send your Q&A in as we go. Being journalists, we're used to having lots of things pinging at one time, so there's no issue. So go ahead and send any questions in from the chat. If you'd like us to know what newsrooms you're coming from or where you're coming from, that's always great for us to know, since we can't see you, but we are here with you. So I'll introduce myself, and then I'm going to pass over to each of our panelists. What I'd love to do is connect the stories of my colleagues here who are also vets with the stories about coming into journalism and the way that writing, being an author, being a journalist, or being a managing editor has the way that path has developed. So I am CEO of the Fuller Project. We do journalism which is focused on, centered on women to raise awareness and spur accountability. We're a global nonprofit newsroom. And as Sarah was saying, each nonprofit newsroom being different, we grew up with a model of partnering often with legacy outlets so that our journalism, which aims to address the gap in news about women, would come out through a really wide range of outlets to a very, very broad audience. We also publish with local news, both in the US and globally, on a wide range of issues. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go, but without further ado, Sherman, I'll come to you first. If you could please give a robust introduction of yourself, and then I'll come back to you to ask about your path into journalism and writing and opinion writing.
Thank you, Xanthe. My name is Sherman Gillums. I'm currently the Chief Strategy and Operations Officer for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I spent the majority of my time post-service from the Marine Corps, however, in the veteran space, and a lot of the work that I've done over the past 16 years involved moving the needle on issues ranging from everything from getting fertility assistance for wounded veterans to canine research in the VA to suicide prevention, of course. And a lot of that time was spent in the journalism realm, trying to find the voices that would be the most effective to help move the needle in Congress, move the public on certain issues. So I came to appreciate the power of journalism through that work as executive director of the organization and later at AMVETS and presently at NAMI. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherman. So Kelly, coming to you, can you talk a bit about, introduce yourself, and if you can talk about your time in service as well, and then your path into being an author and now managing editor at the Warhorse.
Yeah, sure. So I joined the Army in high school, and I knew then I wanted to be a journalist. I edited my high school paper like a lot of journalists now did. And so I joined the Army, the National Guard, between my junior and senior year of high school. Ended up serving in Desert Storm and in Mogadishu, Somalia, when I joined the regular Army. And then went to school. I came home with a lot of questions from Desert Storm and Mogadishu about why we were there, and sorry, I gotta stop my why we were there and where we were. You know, you're 19 years old and don't really know always what you're doing or why. So I went to school. I studied journalism. I worked as a civilian journalist for years at the Oregonian, Chicago Tribune, Salt Lake Tribune. I feel like I've been everywhere, USA Today. And then somewhere in there, I had an editor tell me that I couldn't cover the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan because my arms were too small, which as someone who served in combat twice was upsetting. So I went to work for Army Times, where I figured I would be able to cover the military, and I did. And that's really what's led me to the path that led me to where I am now, as the managing editor. But I embedded in Iraq, and that's where the first book came from, and it's sort of happenstance. So just kind of a all over the place path. But I always knew I wanted to be a journalist.
Thank you. And can you talk to us a little bit about the book, Kelly?
Yeah. So in 2007, I embedded with an infantry unit. It was Charlie Company 126th Infantry. They were in Adamia, Baghdad, neighborhood of Baghdad. And while I was with them, they were hit really, really hard. They lost 5 men from their unit and an interpreter, and a female military police officer was killed that day, also 19. And it was just a horrible day. It was a mass casualty situation. The photographer and I were supposed to be out with them that day and stayed back at the last minute. But the story as a whole started long before we got there. You know, Ross McGinnis was part of that unit, and he threw himself on a grenade when someone threw a grenade into the top of their Humvee, and saved 4 of his friends, and earned a Medal of Honor. They had a first sergeant who was so stressed out, worried about food and water, probably had a head injury himself, wasn't sleeping in front of his men one day. He killed himself. So it really kind of showed the levels of combat stress that wasn't just hitting the younger guys, it was hitting the experienced people as well. There was a battalion commander, Eric Schott's son was home the day that they lost so many men, and I had a heart disorder and died that day, teenage son. So it was every level of badness just seemed to hit this unit, and they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. They had good leadership, but their leadership kept changing. It was early in the wars. They liked to change out officers to give them combat experience. So, you know, you'd have a really good commander who knew the area, and then they put in someone else so it would look good on their resume. Because of our reporting, they stopped doing that. They stopped doing 15-month tours. But as things got worse, the guys refused to go out on a patrol on a black road, and were accused of mutiny. And the book kind of came from there. So they ended up with a presidential citation. So that changed a great deal. But the story was pretty intense. And it started out as a series for Army Times. And then, yeah, it just grew into a book. So.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, that gets at something I wanted to talk with both you and Sherman about, which is the experience that you had being in service and how that influences the kinds of stories that you tell, the kinds of stories that you report, the way you report. So I'll ask you a follow-up, and then Sherman, I wanted to chat more with you about the same. But hearing a little bit about the Warhorse, if you can share a little bit more about the Warhorse and how you all work, and why you were drawn to the managing editor role at the Warhorse, with this idea of what it means to report on military issues with your background.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the same thing, and I'm sure you'd say the same thing, but you know, these are my guys, and I want to take care of my guys. And I feel like all of my reporting has been around that. And I feel like that's what the Warhorse does. You know, we look out for our guys, and you can tell the stories from the general officer level, and we do sometimes, but the ones you really want to get at are the people. And that's our everyday. That's what we talk about in every meeting. And that's why I love it so much. Like, the mission is so key and strong in every element of what we do.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I think that's true across the nonprofit news landscape, which is that we're here for a sense of mission and purpose. And I think that can also be true in for-profit news, but certainly the nonprofit mission-oriented nature of our newsrooms attracts different people and brings us to different outcomes and influences the way that we work. So glad to hear a little bit about that. And Sherman, you are also on the board of the War Horse, and I've also had the pleasure of talking with you in the past, and so have heard you talk about how your time in, I believe you were in public affairs during part of your time as an officer in the Marine Corps, and how that influenced your understanding internally, but also with external actors. So interested to hear you talk about these two parts of the question, you know, how your experiences as a vet influence the way that you interact with journalism, and then also what specifically attracted you to the nonprofit newsroom at the War Horse.
Thank you. And for all the Marine 4600s out there, I was a combat camera specialist. We were often embedded with public affairs. In fact, we fell under command. I'm so glad that Kelly was able to give those rich descriptions of her experience. And I imagine it takes time to get to a point where you can give it words. Well, what I did in the Marine Corps is we often captured images when words weren't adequate. My experience with what we were capturing through our film work, and at that time there was film, everybody didn't have a camera and you couldn't just pull out an iPhone and take photos. But in order to capture what was there, we had to be a part of the experience, and the smells, the energy, all those things don't show up oftentimes when you see the image, but as the one who was there pulling it all in, you were preserving that point in time, either for an investigation, for the public, for another purpose, but you were a part of the story. You were embedded into the story. So it's important to not only be skillful in the moment, but not make yourself, you don't bring anything personal, you just sort of capture it. And then you have people like Kelly who, when given the time, can take what we're experiencing and what we see and put it into words and take us into the moment. And that's why it's important for public affairs and all those folks who did those roles, because we don't learn lessons if we don't understand what we're talking about. I remember, Kelly went to Desert Storm. That was the first televised war. That was the first time we understood the implications of war. The problem was, it looked like, 48 hours we were done, and you could win wars, and the public bought into this idea that we were so powerful that we could go in and virtually, go through a few battles and declare victory. And we found out almost a little over a decade later, which bookended my 12 years in the Marine Corps, Persian Gulf, and then the war in Afghanistan, that it wasn't what we thought it was. And it was important to look back. What did we miss? What didn't we know? We all saw the photos, got rest in peace. Secretary Powell died, but we saw the images and thought we knew what we were seeing. And it was around that time when I felt like we were losing our grip on reality, because we could create reality. But it was my job in the Marine Corps not to create reality, but to tell the reality. And then public affairs would often translate that into something for public consumption. But that was my role. That's where I first fell in love with the idea of speaking truth to power, taking reality, making it real, and making the public a part of it, because people who can contain the story often control the interpretation. So when I got into the nonprofit space, I already had a bias for this sort of work, this mission work, and that's why I went into the nonprofit field instead of corporate America. Or I probably could have made a lot more money, but I wouldn't have been a purveyor of truth the way that I was able to when we went to Capitol Hill and could tell the stories of the men and women who were lying in beds in Phoenix 5 years before the bottom fell out. We talked about the clinical spaces being too small. We talked about the number of the staff morale and all those things that ended up pulling the bottom out of a system that really was a microcosm of what was happening across the entire system. So that type of work really took form for me when I got involved in commentary. And I wrote a few op-eds that caught the attention of the VA secretary. And when he asked me about it, I thought, boy, this is some powerful stuff. I want more of it. I want to get good at it. I don't want to give a quote to a reporter. I want to tell the story in its genuine tenor. And the War Horse intersected with that when we began to look into the case of a Marine corporal who was being held in a brig after clearly suffering a mental condition that led to what got her in the brig. And it wasn't until I saw the expanded reflection and overview of her story, something I couldn't have written, but I wanted to see that. And when I saw that, I said to myself, this is what needs to happen in this time when there's too much manufactured news. Everybody's got the smartphone, everybody can write a blog, but this is really telling her story. And I think it had an impact. And because the Warhorse was there embedded like PAO, in those convoys, I felt like that's the only way we're going to get to the truth. And so when I was asked to be a part of that team, of people committed to the truth, I didn't hesitate. This is where I want to be, and I'm here to learn, and I love it. And we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep pressing truth as a friend to the public.
Right. Thank you, Sherman. Thank you so much. So much of what you said resonates for me as well, especially when we're talking about reporting on an area where we haven't had enough expert level reporters, contributors, et cetera. And we know that we do need more vets in journalism. Just as for us at the Fuller Project, we've needed more people focused on women with a journalistic expertise that you build up over time. When you enter into an issue with that, you can bring much more light to the issue. And we had as you were talking, we had someone make a comment, people thought these events were unfolding just as they would watch them on CNN, whereas in fact, we know there's such a much more rich and real potential to understand events when we have people on the ground who have the sources long-term, who understand how things work. So I share that with you. And we are getting a question in from the audience from Gennaro Preto. I hope I've said your name correctly, Gennaro. What guidance would you have for someone new to journalism breaking into the nonprofit sector? I'll take a stab at that, and then I'll pass that to my colleagues here. Please keep bringing in your questions. We'll try to get to them as quickly as we can, and if not, we can follow up as well. But as far as nonprofit news, one thing I would advise is to really understand the differences between the nonprofit newsrooms, just as you would with any other job you'd look at. But nonprofit newsrooms can be quite different. So, for example, with the Fuller Project, we do staff reporting. We do have we are growing and recruiting, so please stay with us on our webpage and newsletter for those updates. Certainly reporting on military issues is important, and reporting by vets is important. We do reporting with staff, we do reporting with contributors, and we also partner with newsrooms. So that lends to a different way of working. You're working with multiple editors. We have a collaboration with the Warhorse. There are many people involved, and so there are just different ways of working. The other thing that's different is that we do enterprise work or investigative work, not breaking news. And so it's a very different orientation. So if you're someone who thrives on the urgency of the breaking news cycle, wouldn't be a fit. But if you're someone who really likes to go into depth, would be a better fit. So just getting to know some of those differences. And I know from having attended Warhorse's workshops, for example, that Warhorse does diverse things as well, including writing workshops for vets, for military spouses, right? So you would be in a different kind of environment depending on the newsroom. I heard someone is here from Chalkbeat. Chalkbeat is a much larger organization than ours, for example. So you would get to know those differences, quite different from a corporate structure. Often smaller teams, and then of course there's a different environment as far as being funded by foundations versus being funded by subscriptions or advertising in different cases. So let me turn to my colleagues. Kelly, maybe you could speak to the audience about the Warhorse experience. Any other tips that you would have for people looking to get into the field?
Yeah, in some ways, I think it's the same as getting into any newsroom. You write, you get some clips together. You don't just show up at the door and be like, hey, except for at the Warhorse, you can do that. So you can come to us and write a reflection for us. I would help you through that if you've never written anything before. If you have written something before, then that's fabulous. And we have had a couple of people cross over into freelancers. Sonner Kurt this week had a piece about the National Guard and their changing role as we pull out of Afghanistan, as the active duty forces start to draw down. And she's done an amazing job writing about climate news. So come in through the reflections door, and then we can talk about bigger projects. But build your clips, just, figure out what it is you want to do with yourself. One of the things I tell people is, you wait for someone to make you an investigative reporter, and you can't do that. You have to become an investigative reporter. No one's going to give you the time to do it. No one's going to give you the resources to do it, initially at least. So you have to spend your time and your resources and find that story and go for it. And then you are an investigative reporter. You don't wait for someone to do that. So get those clips and then hit us.
Thank you so much. We had a question in about from Danny Stusser from the Jolt. Do any of you want to comment about how a veteran serving as a reporter could tell the stories of the Afghan immigrants coming to the US differently or better than a reporter who has no experience in Afghanistan? Thank you for that, Danny. And I think that we share a feeling that great journalism comes from journalists who really understand the subject matter, have long-term sourcing, and have something to contribute that goes far beyond the quick headlines and impatience of the news cycle. I'll share from our experience of the Fuller Project with regards to our reporting in Afghanistan. There's a kind of parallel here, which is that we have long-term relationships with Afghan women reporters. And so all of our reporting was driven by the Afghan women journalists telling us stories of women. And our experience was that because there wasn't that same necessarily long-term commitment there to having those stories, we were able to provide a breadth and nuance and depth of coverage that a lot of news organizations weren't able to do amid that breaking crisis. And I certainly think the same would be true of someone who had spent time, and that we want journalism from people who have spent time and understand issues. Let me pass to either, actually, I'm gonna surface another question and then pass to each of you, since this might be our last round given time. So that question's on the table, as well as why should journalists consider joining nonprofit versus legacy for-profits? And also, is it easier potentially to begin a career with nonprofits or to enter journalism through the nonprofit channel? So let's have a last word from both of our panelists here on either of those questions, and then we'll be at time.
I'll be quick. I asked my wife as we were sitting watching the evacuation from Kabul about her 18 months there, and I asked her what she thought about it. She was an Army Staff Sergeant, and she said, we spent a lot of time at the orphanages, and she was there in 2009. And those boys and they were all boys because they didn't have girls at orphanages, for some reason. And those boys are now fighting age. And I wonder now, they were so good to us and so innocent. What's their fate? That's what I'm thinking about. Those things don't show up if you don't know what happened. You don't know there's so much that happens that has to do with the human-to-human contact that doesn't get captured if you weren't there. And to the last point, your greatest capital is truth and trust when you're in the nonprofit world, your cause. And you have to be true to that. So it's not about making money and advertisers. You're not controlled by anything other than those things for which you should go into nonprofit work in the first place, which is the mission. And I'll give Kelly the last word.
Just as a helicopter flies over. Yeah, I don't know that it's easier to come in through a nonprofit, but I think it's like anything else. If you know what you want to be when you grow up, you aim that direction, right? You want to live on the East Coast, you go to the East Coast and find a job there. And I think it's the same with nonprofit and for-profit. I'd say the biggest difference is, again, always mission. I know what everybody else is doing. We're all talking about it all the time. The goal is front and center in every meeting, and it makes it feel a little more, to me, fulfilling. And then back to the original question, there are some amazing journalists out there who cover the military who aren't veterans, and they have as much time or more time in Afghanistan or Iraq, and obviously they need to be acknowledged. And the being a veteran can work against you too. There's definitely been some situations where I walked in and said, oh, that's normal. Whereas a civilian walks in and says, there shouldn't be mold on the ceilings, so it can go for and against you. But the war horse, when things were going down in Kabul, we thought about how it felt for the veterans to be processing it right now. And we ran a series of reflections every day that week, from people just talking about how it felt. And it was a way to process the story and to deal with the trauma of it. And that's the first time I've ever been in a newsroom where I felt like everybody got it and understood the importance of it.
Thank you so much to everybody. We're going to go over to JP in just 1 minute. I just want to say thank you so much to Xanthe, to Sherman and Kelly for sharing your experiences. And this conversation just drove home to me once again how important the voices of military veterans are in truly serving our communities through journalism. Thank you. As always, I'm inspired after hearing from INN members, and that's what sort of makes this job infinitely worth it for me. I'm going to drop links in the chat again. These are ways to learn more about nonprofit newsrooms and to connect with all the job opportunities that our members have open now, our wonderful members. I just want to thank all of you for being here and engaging with us. I so appreciate you. And thank you to Zach and Russell for allowing us to be part of this and for being really wonderful partners. So Russell, back to you in the next panel. Bye, everyone.